Step inside the construct. Step inside the construct.
So, what if most of what you believe wasn't actually chosen by you? What if your politics, your worldview, your fears, your identity, what if how you define success was shaped long before you were ever consciously able to understand it or even question it? Welcome to the construct. This podcast is going to explore those systems, those narratives, institutions, psychological frameworks that shape our modern life. I am your host, Xadia, and in this first episode, we're starting with the most important and central question. What's a construct? So let's define the word. The word construct is used in many different ways academically, politically, sometimes even philosophically. But stripped down to its essence, a construct simply is a framework created by people that shapes how we live and understand our reality. Constructs can be very useful, necessary, even. Civilization, I would say, depends on it. Money is a construct. Nations, political parties are constructs. Social status is a construct. Even the way we organize, partially a construct. That doesn't mean it's fake or unnecessary. That's an important distinction. But constructs can also have very real consequences. A border map, for example, that's a human construct that was created by us. A crossing into the wrong border could definitely change your life. So, constructs can have consequences. Human beings are meaning making creatures. I would argue that that's what makes us different from the animal kingdom. We need meaning in our life. Humans, generally speaking, don't like chaos, uncertainty. So we build these systems that reduce our anxiety to create an order. Other constructs that create order might be religion or governments, cultural traditions, even. Constructs help large groups of strangers be able to cooperate through this system of understanding. So, take this. Imagine trying to explain modern banking, social media, or even taxation to a human being from 5,000 years ago. Probably impossible. They would likely see our modern society as an invisible system held together by all of these collective agreements. We can think of these agreements as constructs, laws, for example, human construct, invisible, yet we all understand them. Another example, money. A construct is something that becomes real enough because the people agree that it's real. Money is not really any more valuable than the paper it's printed on, yet a $100 bill is valuable. Why? Because we agree that it is valuable. So there is a collective belief of understanding in constructs. A $100 bill only works if millions of people collectively agree that it has great value. But if the confidence in that item or thought or concept disappears, then the construct is weakened. So we can agree that economies then are based on these psychological agreements. In a sense, economies are built on a psychological agreement of what is valuable. The agreement is that the object, that piece of paper with a one and two zeros, represents values. And we trust it. And so we accept it. And we trust that our institutions, like our governments, are going to also protect its value. So we organize this behavior around that trust. But the moment that trust begins to erode, then the construct weakens. So now I want to introduce the concept of the invisible inheritance, which is our worldview. Most people inherit their worldview before they can even analyze it or start to question it. And what contributes to worldview? Family, geography, religion, your education, media, social circles, algorithms. Let's take the example of twins separated at birth. One ends up living in Texas, rural Texas, and the other in California. Of course, and very likely, they're going to develop very different political worldviews. Why? Well, because humans absorbed constructs, remember, frameworks within their environment. So the difference is environmental inheritance. Each twin has absorbed a different set of frameworks. That brings them to different set of assumptions, stories, the definition of freedom even, maybe even the definition of what's fair or just. A different way to understand community and perceptions of what maybe is risky or not. So these twins are not simply expressing individual preferences, they are expressing inherited frameworks. This demonstrates a powerful truth. Human beings absorb constructs from their environment, which means that the environment is the first architect of our reality or perceived reality. So, what if we think of constructs as a mental operating system? Very similar to our own computers, and they have an operating system. We have a mental operating system that helps us organize and understand the world that we're living in. Our family is probably the most important and powerful source of that operating system that I'm going to call the invisible inheritance. From the family, children learn what authority is and how it should be viewed. Probably as well what success is and what it looks like. What groups are to be trusted, what groups are to be feared and maybe not trusted. What values are most important. Many political beliefs begin as family beliefs, long before they become personal beliefs. Geography, where a person is raised, definitely matters. A person raised in rural Texas may experience local identity, economic realities, cultural traditions, and social norms very different from a coastal California person who is probably going to experience greater population density, different industries, different cultural diversity, different political priorities. Neither environment is neutral, and I think that's really important to keep in mind. But each will teach us through a particular lens in which we will view and understand reality. Religion. Religion often also provides the deepest framework of all. It shapes beliefs about human nature, morality, authority, purpose, community, justice. And let's not forget education. Schools teach more than just facts, they also teach a way of thinking. They teach what history matters, they teach what questions are worth asking. Educations help construct an intellectual lens through which people interpret society. So, if we have a geographical region teaching that certain ideas or books are not important, or maybe even that they are untrue, then we have clusters of people dismissing concepts. This becomes relevant on issues of justice and injustice. And we'll circle back to that. Media is a constant stream of narratives that shape our perceptions of everything, of threats, of opportunities, of heroes, villains, causes of social problems, and solutions to social problems. Over time, repeated exposure creates familiarity. And when things become familiar, they become perceived as truths. And let's not forget social media and algorithms. This might be probably the most powerful force today. Previous generations shared a relatively common information environment, but today algorithms customize reality to the individual. Two neighbors living in the same city can consume entirely different information streams, giving them each a very radically different understanding of politics, of crime, of economics, of health, culture, justice, and injustice. This result is not merely a disagreement, it emerges as a different perceived reality. And the problem is that most people are unaware of that software, that invisible inheritance, the mental operating system that is running through their mind, our mind. They simply assume that they are simply seeing reality, but they're seeing reality through a framework, a construct, a lens. Two people can witness the same event and each reach a completely different conclusion because their operating systems are different. They have different frameworks. The event is still the same, but the interpretation is different. This is one of the reasons why political conversations today probably feel impossible. Because as a society, we're experiencing a loss of shared meaning, of shared culture, shared norms. We don't agree on the conclusions revolving around slavery, even the Holocaust. Nowadays, you can run into someone who has a completely different worldview of even if these things existed. Legislation that makes it the law to present all sides, like some of the Texas House bills, and the book bans that are now pretty widespread in southern states like Florida, Iowa, or Texas. The point of this is to restrict the lens that people need to understand these historical events. I would say it's an act to impose perhaps a preferred lens or a framework to create a new mental operating system for interpreting key pieces of our own history. So, why do people resist questions? Questioning constructs maybe can feel destabilizing. Maybe constructs provide a certain psychological safety. Imagine realizing one day that your political tribe is manipulating you, that your media sources may selectively frame reality, that your identity may be partially socially reinforced performance. Your certainty may actually not be certainty at all. Of course, this would be uncomfortable, but awareness begins with discomfort, and awareness begins with questions. So I'm inviting you to start to question some of your own constructs. One of the defining tensions of our modern society today is that now we have competing constructs and they're colliding in real time. I'll give you a few examples. Traditional masculinity versus modern identity, modern society, nationalism versus globalization, institutional trust versus populism, individual freedom versus collective responsibility, technology versus humanity. All of these are colliding in real time, and social media is accelerating that collision. Why? So consider this. For the most of human history, people lived within small circles. Our reputation was shaped by the people who actually knew us. Family knew you, neighbors knew you, friends knew you, and the distance between who you were and what people perceived of you was pretty small. But today, that gap has become enormous. We're living through something humanity has never experienced before. For the first time in history, ordinary people have the ability to create a public identity that can be viewed by hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people. And whenever a behavior is rewarded, human beings adapt to it, just like dogs. If your dog does something well, we give it a treat. Social media rewards through visibility and likes. Performance rewards attention. Attention becomes currency. And over time, people stop asking the very important question: am I expressing who I am? Or am I performing who I think should be rewarded? Modern society increasingly rewards performance over authenticity. People now curate identities online. Politicians curate outrage. Let's take the influencer culture. Influencer culture has blurred the lines between person and product. Over time, many people begin performing versions of themselves optimized for validation through likes or through ads. People have become themselves a product or a brand. Think about that for a moment. A generation ago, branding was something a corporation did. Today, individuals build brands. We carefully select photos, we edit captions, we choose which moments to display, which ones not to display and hide. We become public relation departments of our own lives. Now, there's nothing wrong with presenting our best self, but the problem begins when performance becomes more important than the real person, when likes are more important than eternal truth, when the image begins replacing identity. In many ways, modern technology has transformed the identity into a construct. And that's where the awareness becomes important. Because once you understand the incentives, you begin to recognize the performance in others, and perhaps more importantly, in yourself. Now, at this point, some of you might be wondering, is this podcast about being skeptical of everything? Is it about rejecting institutions? Is it about distrusting media, government, corporations, or even culture? No, it's not. Not at all. Because blind distrust is another construct. The podcast, my goal, my aim, is about not to tell you what to think, but it's about to ask you to question. Becoming aware. Awareness will require some humility because it requires acknowledging that maybe we don't see the entire picture, acknowledging that perhaps we don't have all the facts, we don't know everything. It requires accepting that our own beliefs, perhaps as well, should be examined. The goal is not to tear everything down. The goal is to better understand what we are standing on. Are we standing on structurally sound assumptions? Can we withstand perhaps some inspection, examination? Only fragile structures fear questions. Think about that. Only fragile structures are afraid of questions. Questions are not threats, they are tools. Questions discover truth. Every major scientific breakthrough began with a question. Every social reform began with a question. Why do we do the things we do? What assumptions am I making? What if I'm wrong? These are the questions that have changed history. Awareness changes how you move through the world, because then you'll begin to notice framing. Not just what people tell you, but how they tell you. What details are emphasized? What details are omitted? What emotional response is being encouraged? You'll begin to notice incentives. Who's benefiting from this? Who's profiting? Who gains power? Who gains influence? And then you'll begin to notice narratives. The stories societies tell themselves. The stories political parties tell, or perhaps don't want to tell. The stories media organizations tell. The stories individuals tell about themselves. You'll begin to notice emotional manipulation. Perhaps it's fear. Perhaps it's outrage. Maybe it's moral panic or tribal loyalty, blind loyalty. Maybe it's psychological pressure. You might even begin to notice tribal conditioning, which is the pressure to just conform, go with the flow, go with your crowd, go with your party, the pressure to agree, the pressure to choose sides. And perhaps more importantly, you'll begin to notice other patterns. The patterns beneath the headlines, the patterns beneath the arguments, the patterns beneath the institutions. And once you begin to see that, we begin to see those constructs. You can't entirely unsee them once you see them, but the world will begin then to look different. Not darker, not brighter, different, clearer. This podcast is not about telling you what to think, but it is about learning how to question, about asking questions to become aware. I invite you to take that step with me to become aware. This modern world is very loud and very emotionally activated. Perhaps one of the most radical things we can do today is to ask, who benefits from this narrative? What assumptions am I inheriting? What framework am I operating inside? And what happens if I question it? This has been Inside the Construct. If this conversation resonated with you, follow the podcast and share it with someone who you believe questions matter, because awareness begins with questions.
Politics, media, culture, identity in a frame. You grow up calling it normal till you hear it has a name. What if the wall is invisible? What if the room is small? What if the truth was never missing? It was hiding in plain talk. Pull at the thread and watch it move. One small doubt can split the proof. If you felt there's more beneath, you're not alone. Come in with me. Step inside the construct. Step inside the construct.